Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Ruttama Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtike Srinvata Swakatha Krishna Punyasravana Kirtanaha Hridayantastoya Bhadrani Vidhanoti Suratsatam. Today we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 10, Verse 10. Vidura uvacha yatatta bhaurupasya harer hadbhuta karmanaha kalakyam lakshanam brahman yata varnayanaha prabho. Vidura uvacha. Vidura said, yata, as, atta, you have said, bhaurupasya, having varieties of forms, hare, of the Lord, adbhuta, wonderful, karmanaha, of the actor, kala, time, akyam, of the name, lakshanam, symptoms, brahman, O learned brahmana, yataha, as it is, varnaya, please describe, naha, unto us, prabho, O Lord. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhishek Naravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. Vidura inquired from Maitreya, O my Lord, O greatly learned sage, kindly describe eternal time, which is another form of the Supreme Lord, the wonderful actor. What are the symptoms of that eternal time? Please describe them to us in detail. Purport. The complete universe is a manifestation of varieties of entities, beginning from the atoms up to the gigantic universe itself, and all is under the control of the Supreme Lord in his form of Kala, or eternal time. The controlling time has different dimensions in relation to particular physical embodiments. There is a time for atomic dissolution and a time for the universal dissolution. There is a time for the annihilation of the body of the human being, and there is a time for the annihilation of the universal body. Also, growth, development, and resultant actions all depend on the time factor. Vidura wanted to know in detail the different physical manifestation and their times of annihilation. We'll offer some prayers and then we'll discuss some things about the words. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Chakshuronmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Welcome to this continuation of the discussion that we're having between Maitreya Muni and Vidura, where I think it's been quite a long discussion that both of them are having about overall creation. And as we see in the beginning of this the chapter, Vidura asked Maitreya Muni after the previous discussion that they had about Lord Brahma and other things. Vidura asked Maitreya Muni about the specific service Lord Brahma is about to do for the creation. And we have seen in the previous verses that Maitreya actually explained to him in kind of in a gist about the overall creation. Now, if we look at this verse, Vidura is kind of in that inquisitive mode, and he's saying, please describe them to us in detail. So he's kind of wanting to know much more in-depth details, and he's asking, in his primary question is about the time factor, which the Kala, as we all say, Kala and the time factor. So that's what he wants to understand. But using that as a question is kind of asking everything for Maitreya Muni to kind of discuss everything in detail. And in the next few verses, we'll actually see the detailed kind of very almost on a nuclear kind of much subatomic level, the further descriptions and the detailed explanations that Maitreya Muni will give an overall sense about the creation. But if we, so on this time factor, if again, one thing that I was actually, when this verse came, once I got to know that I'll have to give the class on this verse, one of the meditation that I was having was similar to, I'm sure all the devotees here are kind of well versed with their understanding on the time factor. So it's not something that I can add anything much to more than what all of you actually, I'm sure like all of you can give any explanation and then the discussions on the time factor much more in an elaborated and in kind of much more realized way than I can ever even imagine. But one thing that I was actually meditating was like with every verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, depending on whether it could be the state of consciousness that we have, or whether it could be our meditation during that time of that period of time when we are actually going through that specific verse, there are various ways of discussions and then the directions that we could take. And similarly for this, like when we think of time, then we also see that like during my kind of, as my preparation for this class, I was just trying to quickly go through Veda based just to understand like what are the differences Kala has in across Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And just a basic search on Kala kind of actually gave me almost more than 2000 references. So if and obviously both those 2000 references, sometimes it was not just on Kala, but sometimes it was Kala and all those. And if we actually exclude the references which are not exactly referring to the time factor or the quotes that Srila Prabhupada was using, but just on the Kala the using the usage of word Kala across the verses, say that in Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam, if it was somewhere around more than 1000. So it means the topic of Kala is kind of a constant theme that comes up in multiple places across the scriptures, primarily in Bhagavad Gita, as we understand the 5 topics of the primary 5 topics of Bhagavad Gita, out of which Kala is one of the main factors. And then this Kala is kind of interwoven in almost every canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and in some cases kind of every chapter, whether it could be the discussions that 2 devotees are having, like in the case of Narada Muni having that discussion with Yudhishthir Maharaj, or whether it could be the instructions that one devotee is giving to the other, in the case of Kapila Muni, when Lord Kapila is giving the instructions to Mother Devahuti, or when Swayambhuva Manu is giving those instructions to Dhruva Maharaj, or whether it could be just the Lord himself kind of giving instructions to Arjuna in the case of Bhagavad Gita, where he says that he is Kalosmi, where he says Kalosmi Lokaksha Krit. So he says, I am the time, and I as a time destroy. I Krit. He says, I do it. And then what does he do is, as Kala is Lokaksha, he destroys the worlds. So there, as we see, it's like the theme of time is a kind of constant reoccurrence in multiple places. As we know, the scriptures is, as we understand, is sometimes discussion between the devotees, or sometimes instructions from one devotee to the other, or sometimes it's the Lord instructing the devotees, or sometimes we also see the reference of Kala in the prayers that the devotees are offering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We see that across many places. And as I was trying to see most of these references, it sometimes appears, if we take in the example of Narada Muni when he is instructing to Yudhishthir Maharaj after Dhritarashtra left, Narada Muni is saying that now the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Lord, has appeared in the form of time to annihilate all the envious people. And if you also go back into the discussion that Lord Kapila is having with Devahuti Muni, their Mother Devahuti, or the discussion that Swayambhuva Manu is having with Dhruva Maharaj, it's interesting. Both of them are actually saying the same verse. They say the Supreme Lord is appeared in the form of time as a killer of everything. So one might actually question that okay, we understand the time is kind of a representation of the Supreme Lord, but in saying so that Kalos me Lokakshaya, and then he is the killer of everything, and then he is killer of these envious people, are we trying to invoke by these constant references to the time? Are we trying to invoke fear in the person who is hearing these instructions? And an expansion and then kind of extension to that question could be that, does bhakti involve fear? And is Krishna that kind of a personality who invokes the surrender in people by invoking fear in their heart of saying that, hey, if you're not surrendering to me, then everything is going to be destroyed. So this is kind of the theme that I wanted to discuss in this discussion. Is bhakti predominantly driven by the motivation of fear, and is that what the Lord or the devotees are trying to kind of say when they're saying about all these the references to the Kala as time, which is a kind of in the mode of destruction? And when I was thinking about how to even kind of understand this point, I could think of one analogy which Srila Prabhupada also many times references is the analogy of government. As we all understand, when we speak of government, sometimes like the Supreme Personality of Godhead, government in many a sense it might be perceived as an impersonal entity, but again, there are people who actually are running the government. So it's kind of in similar lines with the Lord. Is Kala, the time might appear as kind of this impersonal representation of the Supreme Lord, but we all understand that the Supreme Lord is a person. So I just wanted to kind of take this example of government. As we all understand, the law enforcement, as a government, there are multiple agencies and multiple departments that we have. And one of the most important department that for a government to effectively run is the law enforcement agency. And the purpose of any sane man or any intelligent man can actually understand, who has kind of maybe to some degree understand the way how the governments work or any of things, is the purpose of the law enforcement agency or the purpose of the prison house or any of this is to not invoke fear in the people, saying that if I take a right turn, then maybe somebody will arrest me. It's not to invoke fear in people, but to maintain stability. And how do you maintain stability as parents and kind of leaders to whatever degree that we have? For us to have some kind of maintenance of stability, we all need some boundaries. And the law enforcement agency makes sure that there are boundaries specifically set. And by kind of having these rules and laws in place, it also helps people understand that there are consequences of crossing those boundaries. So irrespective of whether we are in our house or whether we are in a prison house, eventually government is the one which is kind of taking care of us. Or we can argue against it, saying that they might not. But in essence, government is the one which is supposed to take care of us, which Srila Prabhupada in many of his examples explains that the king, who is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his responsibility is to kind of take care of every individual citizen under his. It could be, in fact, Srila Prabhupada says that it's not just about the human citizens, but it's about every living entity who is under his control. He is their father and he needs to take care of that. So if we in our present day times, the government is kind of the king. So government is taking care of us, whether we are in our homes or whether we are in a prison house. But the perception of how we perceive the government depends on where we are. If we are in our homes, we might perceive the government to be this loving entity who is there to kind of nourish us, provide us when there is some necessity. And if you are in the prison house, it might appear there is a fear and all of that. So it's kind of in connection to the disposition that we have towards the government. So I'll kind of pause this connection to the government here, and then I'll kind of discuss something in connection to that, and then we'll again come back to this point of the government, and then the point of having fear. now as we understood that, okay, we all have this experience with government. We all understand there are people running the government and all of that. But for us, how do we even actually kind of understand is Krishna actually invoking the fear? Because maybe we met some kind of police officers, so we know that it's not that they're being driven by need of control, or by need of invoking fear in their citizens. But how do we even understand about the Lord? Like, we have never kind of spoken to the Lord. Maybe we don't know what kind of personality that he is. And to understand who is like, how does Lord look himself as, is again we have to go back to the kind of the manual instruction that the Supreme Lord has given us, the Bhagavad Gita. And in that, when the Lord is describing himself in the 9th chapter, which is termed beautifully as the most confidential knowledge, is kind of placed right in between all the chapters. And right in between the 9th chapter, in the 18th verse, which I think the 9th chapter total has like 38 verses. And then right in the middle of the 18th verse, Krishna is describing himself. He describes in multiple, like there are sequences of verses that Krishna is describing himself. And in the 18th verse, Krishna describes again himself as multiple things. And one of the personal characteristics that Krishna describes himself as Suhrit. In essence, Suhrit basically means friend. And as we all understand, in multiple languages, whether it could be any of our mother tongue, Bengali, Hindi, Tamil, or anything, or like some Spanish or anything, any of our mother tongues, we understand friend has multiple kind of synonyms that comes up, and depending on the level of friendship and then the type of friendship that we have, specific word is used. Like friend kind of encompasses overall understanding of that. And similarly in Sanskrit, we have multiple meanings or multiple words that are used for friend, like Mitra, Shreyabhilashi, and all of that. Suhrit in essence means Su, as we all understand, is good or kind, and Hrit basically means heart. And if you just combine both of that, it basically in essence means kind-hearted or good-hearted person. So this, and Srila Prabhupada in the translation, in the word-to-word translation to that, to the verse 9.18, he translates Surat as one who always desires our welfare. And that's a constant definition that Prabhupada actually gives. I was trying to also look up on the Surat if Srila Prabhupada actually gave any other definition on that. But in essence, in multiple references that Srila Prabhupada quotes Surat word, he always says that Surat is a friend who always desires our welfare. Now, if we again go back to once we have this understanding that Krishna is how he sees himself as not this personality of this overpowering controller person, but how he sees himself as this Surat, as a person, as a friend to us, to every living entity who always desires our welfare. Now, if we go back to that concept that we were trying to understand of the government, as with the case of the Supreme Lord, government always wishes welfare for every living entity who is under control. That's how that's how it's supposed to be. But whether, as we discussed, whether we are inside our home in a loving environment, or whether we are inside a present house, is driven based on our disposition towards the government. And similarly, if you kind of expand on that lines, then any intelligent person would want to reside outside of prison house in a peaceful kind of environment. So now if we actually kind of think deeper, then it kind of is there that Krishna is describing himself as Surat, but there are also all these quotes where Krishna is saying Kalosmi Lokakshaya Krit, and then all these various references which are kind of might create this huge burden in our heart, which might invoke fear. So what is it that determines if we are kind of perceiving the Supreme Lord as Surat, as he's describing himself as a friend who is always desiring our welfare, or as this Kalosmi Lokakshaya Krit? So what determines, similar to the government, what determines whether we are in this loving environment of the house, or whether we are in this prison house, kind of with this perceived feeling of fear is, if you again go back to that verse that I was referring earlier, when Narada Muni is speaking with Yudhishthira Maharaj, where he's saying that Lord has now appeared in this time as an incarnation of time factor, where he is killing or eliminate envious from the world. And Srila Prabhupada in that verse, if you ever get a chance, you can go back to that section. It's from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 13th chapter, 49th verse. Srila Prabhupada beautifully translates the verse actually says Surat Dvisham, and Srila Prabhupada beautifully translates Surat Dvisham as envious from as envious people in the verse translation. But in the word-to-word translation, Srila Prabhupada actually translates Surat Dvisham as one who is against the will of the Lord. So it also again goes back to the point of the government. What government determines whether to kind of keep us in this safe and loving space of your comfort of homes or in the prison house is whether we are acting against the will of the government, which is kind of create this law and order and so on and so forth, whatever it could be the will of the government. If you're only a personality who is acting against the will of the Lord, is kind of is faced with that angle of the fear of the government. And in that same verse to that first canto, 13th chapter, 49th verse, Srila Prabhupada in one of the sentences that Srila Prabhupada uses in the purport is he explains that for a devotee, he faces Lord in his factual form, which is the loving form that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is saying as Surat, which is a friend who always desires our welfare. But for a personality who is envious or who is against the will of the Lord, faces the time factor, which is the causal form of the Lord. So in essence, irrespective of whatever position we are in, as we discussed, whether we are in the comfort of our home or whether we are in the prison house, government is the one which is taking care of us. So in similar lines, irrespective of whatever position that we are in, it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is always taking care of us. But in discussing, so it kind of helps us understanding that yes, I'm always in that place where I'm in presence of the Lord, but it still kind of doesn't answer to that question that we are trying to discuss of the fear factor of how do I understand or how do I make sure that I'm kind of in that frame factor of understanding what is the will of the Lord. And so for example, sometimes we might go to some of these countries where the norms of the specific country that we are in might not be exactly same as the norms of that other country. So unless you understand what is the will or what is the norms of that specific country or the government, you cannot kind of follow them. So it's true that one who is against the will of the Lord kind of faces that form of the Lord, which is the causal form for, but how do we understand even what is the will of the Lord? And there, if we also look back into Bhagavad Gita itself, again, when we think of Surat, one of the famous verse, apart from the verse, the Lord is explaining himself as Surat, the other famous verse that Supreme Lord uses Surat in reference to him is Surat, Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam Gnatma Mam Shrantim Ruchati. So when he is referring to himself of who is he says, Bhoktaram Yagnatapasam Sarvalokam Maheshwaram Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam. Is not just stopping himself as Sarvalokam Maheshwaram, is not just this Supreme Lord and enjoyer and all of that, but primarily he is Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam. He is that person who is Surat Sarva Bhutanam. And that person, Gnatva, such a person who understands or realizes the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is Surat, Sarvabhutana. Only such a kind of person can attain peace. So again, it goes back to our question of how do we even understand Gnatva? What would help me understand him to actually attain this peaceful environment where I'm always facing the loving form of the factual form of the Lord, or Supreme Personality of Godhead is seeing, is again, it's like the mind map of connecting back the dots as Lord has presented himself in the Bhagavad Gita. We don't have to kind of look anywhere else. Is when he's kind of explaining to Arjuna, is I think this is one of the very famous points that Srila Prabhupada presents in overall Bhagavad Gita is this is a theme that Srila Prabhupada kind of multiple times in reference to Bhagavad Gita and in other places also he understands. Whenever he has to come to that point of how do we understand Krishna, he always quotes this verse of Bhakto Asime Sakha Cheti. So in the introduction of Bhagavad Gita and also in other places, whenever this concept of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead comes, the Srila Prabhupada always quotes that only way that we can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead is, as he's saying, that he'll only reveal himself to those people who are bhakta, who are his devotee, and who are his sakha, whom he considers as bhakta and friend, devotee and a friend. So now, being a devotee, we all understand, yes, it does make sense that the Supreme Lord will only reveal himself. The only way that we can understand him is by being his devotee. But why to even add that concept of friend in that case? So it again goes back to that point that we are discussing of fear. Is the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Surat is not just a friend who is always wishing our well, but the surrender that he's seeking is kind of, as we understand from the Hayatuki Apratihata, is he kind of wants the surrender, that the invocation of surrender from our heart, not with an understanding of, oh, if I don't surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then so and so happens, then he'll destroy everything that I have, or whatever, like the kind of fear mongering, that the concepts that we have of whenever we hear these verses, Kalos mi Sakha Cheti, or like, sorry, Kalos mi Lokakshaya, or any other references that we are hearing, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not driven by the need of kind of controlling or kind of driving the surrender with the need of control. But what Lord is saying is just not asking for fidelity, which the devotion Chaitanya Charan Prabhu beautifully explains, that bhakti gives us fidelity, which basically will ultimately lead us to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But one of the main components of the surrender is also the flexibility of making choice. And the flexibility of making choice is given because the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's saying that he'll only reveal himself to the people who are his devotee and friend. So as long as we have that, only when we make the choice of surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because as Arjuna says, Karishya Vachanam Tava, he's not saying Karishya Vachanam Tava because he is being driven by the need of fear, saying that, oh, if I don't surrender to whatever the Lord Krishna has said now, then he might not accept me. But the point of understanding from where Karishya Vachanam Tava is coming is from the place of love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and from the place of acceptance, where it again goes back to the point of having that fidelity towards the Lord, of accepting and then trying to follow what the Supreme Lord is saying, and also from the place of love, where it comes to the point of friendship, which is the flexibility of making choice, is that my surrender to you, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, is not with this motivation of that if I surrender it to you, then I'll only see your form of this loving devotee, loving personality. It's not with the need of fear. It's as we all understand, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not driven by the need of having this yes boss followership, or like in this time and age of Instagram, YouTube, we are many a times we see that we are in kind of driven by the need of having this huge following and millions of followers, millions of views, and all of that. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is not that kind of a personality where he is driven by the need to have these yes boss followers. All he's saying is, I'm ready to reveal myself, but all I'm asking is you make that choice of being my devotee and by being my friend. And once we have that, when we make that surrender as a Haituki and Apratihata, without any motivation and without any interruption, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is waiting there to reveal himself, is kind of, there are no clauses or any other conditions apart from, as NOD says, Ahaituki Apratihata. And with that understanding, I'd like to end I know we are almost over time. I'll just take a couple of more minutes just to kind of end on this note with this prayer from Srila Prabodhanand Saraswati from Chaitanya Chandramrita, where he says, this is the fifth verse, the fifth verse from the Chaitanya Chandramrita invocation that Srila Prabodhanand Saraswati wrote on in glorification of Lord Chaitanya. He's saying, Kaivalyam narakayate tridashapur akasha pushpayate Durdantendriya kala sarpa patali protkata damstrayate Vishwam purna sukhayate vidhimayendradischikitayate Yat karunya kataksha vaibhavatam tam gaurame vastumaha. So he's saying that a personality, any person who even has attained sidelong glance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, yet Karunya Kataksha of Gaurama, of Gaura, of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. For such a personality, he explains multiple things, but in context of not having enough time and in context of the theme of discussion that we had today, I'll just discuss on a couple of things. He says in the second lines, he says Kala Sarpa Patali Protkata Damstrayate, and he says Durtanendriya. So he says the senses, which are like Kala Sarpa, which is again the snake, which in many references is kind of considered as death, are senses which might act as this Kala Sarpa, where we are always fearful of, oh, this might happen, that might happen, when we are driven by this need of fear. And these senses, which are approaching the time approaching as snake, which is also kind of the fear aspect that we discussed, that snake, the Kala Sarpa, will become impotent because its venomous fangs are broken. And how are they broken? Because of the Yat Karunya Kataksha, just because we attained the sidelong glance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he says, for such a personality, what happens is Vishwam Purna Sukhayate, and the entire world becomes full of joy. So all we have to do is to have this disposition of love and friendship and devotion towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And once we have that, by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, by the mercy of our own spiritual masters, and by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as long as we are in that place of where we can attain that sidelong glance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there is no fear of Kala Sarpa. It's not just that there is no fear of Kala Sarpa, but the entire world becomes full of joy. As we all understand, the process of Krishna consciousness is full of joy. And that's what Srila Prabodhanand Saraswati is also explaining here, is everything becomes Purna Sukha. It's Purna Sukhayate. It's not just Sukhayate, Vishwam Purna. The entire world becomes full of joy. And taking that as a key cue, I seek apologies. I'm trying hard to kind of not go over time, but it's still a challenge for me. But I seek your apologies for going over time. But taking that as a cue, that what Srila Prabhupada and Saraswati is explaining, taking that as a cue, I seek your blessing so that may I always be in that position to have that sidelong glance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through the prayers and blessings of all of you. And being in that position, may we all be recipient of the sidelong glances of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where we are no longer have this fear of Kala Sarpa, and we are always in this world which is full of joy. And on that note, I'll end. I'm sorry if there was something that was spoken which was, I definitely spoke a lot of things which are definitely beyond my capability of understanding or realization. But as I always say, these classes are much more kind of beneficial for me just to understand and kind of grasp these things and kind of internalize. And if there are any questions or corrections or comments, I'm open. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Your talks are always, full of, you have researched so well that you have so many, pertinent points. It's so nice to hear. The fear aspect and time. Anyway, Krishna says, Mrityu sarva harasthaham. I am the death, that all devouring death. So there is a fear aspect to the Lord, don't we fear death, Similarly, his time, and the time is always moving forward at a pace that we cannot catch up with. So we are also subject to that. Time is, our lifespan is reduced by every day's this thing, sun's rising and setting. And the fidelity point, that you mentioned, that is, we are becoming, mamcha yo abhyapicharena bhakti yogena sevate. That is, our mind should be purified by always thinking of Krishna. That's why, smaranam is one of the processes. That is, time. It doesn't matter. I mean, my mind at this point is thinking something. I am not doing any activities, but my mind is thinking of Krishna. So there, that time is, even my mind is occupied thinking Krishna. So, and also in Brahma Samhita, that verse, yasyatnya brahmati sambrahma kala chakro, something like that. So out of fear of Krishna, the wind is blowing, the sun god is making his that everybody has a certain fear about fear of the Lord. And there is a statement which says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that is, so when we don't have a teacher in the class, we know how kids behave. And when the teacher is there, how disciplined they are. Similarly, it says in one of the prayers of Lord Shiva, that is Rudra Gita, he says that we are always driven by this, desire to do this or that, and for such people, that is, we are taking our mind away from Krishna, walking away from Krishna. For such people, death is waiting to strike him, just like a snake is following the frog that is going in search of its prey. The frog is hunting for something, but the snake is following that frog. So similarly, for such people who are always busy with this and that, but no time for the Lord, death is waiting to strike, just like the serpent. So, I mean, these were my thoughts that came up. And so there is a certain element of fear associated with the Lord. I mean, that's a respectful fear. Otherwise, we would have no a meaning for time. A time becomes meaningful when we have a certain fear. Oh, what am I doing now? What am I doing today? Because Lord says, Yashantu andagata papam jananam punya karmana dvanda moha nirmukta. That is, our activities tend to be those punya karma, which karma is burned in that activity when we have fear or that respect for the Lord. So these are my thoughts that came up. Thank you very much. Very wonderful class, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. And thank you for remembering that Lord Chaitanya's blessing. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhuji, yeah, I know that we are already late, so I'll just quickly say something. Yeah, amazing class, Prabhuji. Amazing. So many detailed points, so many meditative points. I like the two particular ones that you took extra time to talk about. One is Suhruda, and the other one is, now I'm forgetting time, So wonderful class. I agree with everything that, Sandhya Mataji said. And on top of that, I think your realizations are also there. I think anything else I want to say, I'll take it offline and, say it to you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. No other questions or corrections, then we can end.
Prabhu, if I might say one more
Yes, ma'am.
sentence. Okay. That is, this time that you said it's being, very scientifically going to be described in the coming verses. What struck me as most scientific about Bhagavatam is the description of time, because the smallest measure of time described in Bhagavatam is a picosecond, that is, or even femto, I think, 10 to the power of -12 or -15th of a second. So imagine our sage Maitreya, who is, the scientists can only think about that kind of a small fraction of time, even today. That in the ancient wisdom of India, there exists this small definition, unit of time, that is, running current in science. that amazed me. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
I think we'll end here. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha. Kripa sindhubhyevacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo.